Today on the John Ankerberg Show, wherever you look, the world is in chaos. The war between Hamas, the Palestinians, and Israel is temporarily in a ceasefire, but threatens to escalate again at any moment. Currently, 20 to 31,000 Islamic terrorists have set up an Islamic caliphate in Iraq and Syria and are bringing violent death and persecution to 3 million Christians and Jews, while at the same time threatening to attack America and other nations. In Europe, Russian troops have used their military power to invade the Crimea and parts of the Ukraine and pose a threat to other states in Europe. Iran continues to build nuclear weapons and vows to destroy Israel, while nuclear negotiations with the UN have failed. How do the events that we are seeing in our world today relate to biblical prophecy? My guest today is news journalist and prophecy scholar Dr. Jimmy DeYoung, who has lived and reported from Jerusalem since 1993. He has interviewed every Israeli prime minister during these years, as well as Jordan's King Abdullah and the late Palestinian leader Yasser Arafat. Join us for this special edition of the John Ankerberg Show. Welcome to our program. I'm John Ankerberg, and we're talking about world chaos and biblical prophecy. As you look at the news and you see the events that are taking place, the expansion of power of Russia, what's happening between Israel and Hamas, what's taking place with ICE in the Middle East, do you think the world is in chaos right now? 77% of Americans believe that our country is likely to be attacked. And my guest today is a wonderful guest. He's a news journalist from Jerusalem. And today, in terms of the world chaos that's going on, I want to zero in on a country that you may not be thinking about. But this country, military experts say, is one of the key players in stopping ICE. It is one of the biggest Islamic countries in the Middle East. It is also a part of NATO. And this country, Dr. DeYoung, is Turkey. I want you to tell us, why is Turkey so important in world events right now?
Oh, because of their leadership is probably the main point. Tayyip Erdogan, who is the newly elected president of Turkey, has come up from his position as mayor in Istanbul. He showed forth his radical Islamic ambitions at that point in time. The military in Turkey has been the custodian for their state, which they refer to as a secular Islam. I'm not sure what that means. That's kind of an oxymoron. But that's what they wanted to have. And they have 98% of their population, which would consider themselves secular Islamic peoples. Meanwhile, you have Tayyip Erdogan there as mayor of Istanbul. He has a desire to become the pan-Islamic leader of the entire Middle East. In other words, he wants to be the number one Islamic leader. They take him out of office, the military, the custodian for all of that activity there in the state of Turkey. He forms a political party. His party is large enough to bring him to power as prime minister after they change the constitution. He serves the limit of time he can serve as prime minister. He decides to run for president. Until this time, the president of Turkey has been somewhat of a ceremonial responsibility. He said from the very outset, in fact, during his campaigning, I'm going to make it a key position in the leadership of Turkey. And so now he is the president of Turkey and probably has another 12 years in that particular position. Now, you put that all together with the leadership and recognize how he is dealing with these Mideast conflicts that you're talking about. He has stood beside the Islamic leaders there in Hamas against Israel. He's done everything he possibly can to side with the Palestinians, with the radical Islamic terror group Hamas against the Jewish state of Israel.
He's been providing the money.
He's been providing the money. He's been providing the munitions. He's been providing the way for those munitions to get there from Iran through Turkey to the Sinai, and then through the tunnels into the area of the Gaza Strip there. He came out against Israel in the relationship. The Prime Minister of Israel has made the statement that Hamas has their foreign headquarters in Turkey itself. In addition to that, he's been allowing these radical Islamists out of Europe, out of the United States, to come to the Turkish-Syrian border, cross over into Syria, join the fighting forces against Bashar Assad. They then have become a part of this Islamic State recruited by al-Baghdadi. So that's a major position.
Not only has he had an open door for people across the world going through Turkey into Syria, but it also works the opposite way. The CIA says there's over 1,000 people that actually have passports that could get them into Europe or into America. They can go right back out through Turkey as well.
And be a major danger to the European continent and to the United States of America. He controls the water, basically, for the entire Middle East, because the river Euphrates flows through his nation of Turkey, flowing then into Syria and Iraq and all the other countries going into the Persian Gulf. Well, he has 21 dams on this Euphrates River, and he could turn it off. He did several years ago, and the father of Bashar Assad, Hafez al-Assad, was livid. Saddam Hussein was in power in Iraq at that time, was livid about it. So he has a major position as it relates. Now, you said he's in NATO. That is correct. He wants to join the European Union. European Union is holding him at arm's length because they believe this would be the doorway bringing Islam into Europe.
Now, you say, why are we talking about this in terms of biblical prophecy? Because not only does the world and military leaders think that that's an important spot, going into the Middle East and then going into Europe and natural resources and funding terrorism and all of that, it's amazing to me that the Bible says in Ezekiel 38, it talks about this country 4 times as being one of the key nations. It's part of the Ezekiel 38 coalition of nations that comes against Israel. I want you to take our folks through this important prophetic passage and show where Turkey's at.
Ezekiel 38 is a passage. There are other passages, Psalm 83, Daniel 11, verses 40 to 45. But Ezekiel 38 is the main passage on the Gog-Magog battle that's going to take place in these first 6 months of the tribulation period, which is key because all the players have to be ready to do that. When you look at Ezekiel chapter 38 and verse 2, you see the first nation that's mentioned, Magog. We've already talked about that on a previous program, which is modern-day Russia. Gog is the leader, and should all of this be fulfilled today, Gog would be Vladimir Putin. He's ready in Russia to accomplish what needs to be done. But his partners are going to include it in chapter 38, verse 2. It mentions Meshech and Tubal. And then in verse 6, it mentions Gomer and Togarmah. These are the 4 sections of what is modern-day Turkey. And some 4,500 years ago, when nations were established, that's where those 4 sons of Japheth, the grandsons of Noah, the brothers of Magog, went to live. Meshech, Tubal, Gomer, and Togarmah. When their brother Magog went north of the Caspian and Black Sea, they went south of the Caspian and Black Sea. They established the nation of Turkey. And then when you come to chapter 5, Persia, modern-day Iran, Ethiopia, modern-day Ethiopia, Somalia, Sudan, Put, or Libya. And so this is the major part of the coalition that will form in the last days to try to go into Jerusalem and wipe out the Jewish state.
All right, we're going to take a break, Jimmy, and when we come back, I want to follow the scenario of Ezekiel 38. What's going to happen with Turkey and the nations that you named? I would like you to give some evidence that these nations are forming right now a coalition. They are forming partnerships. They are forming an alliance. And they all seem to have one of the standards as being they're against Israel. Okay? And I want you to tell the folks what the Bible says is going to happen up ahead. So stick with us and we'll be right back. All right, we're back. We're talking with Dr. Jimmy DeYoung, and we're talking about world chaos and biblical prophecy. And we're talking about the interesting country of Turkey right now, the influence it has on the Middle East, the influence that it has on Europe, and the place that it has in biblical events of the end time, how it's named in Ezekiel 38 and other places. And Jimmy, I think all of us that are listening to the news, we've heard Turkey mentioned along with Qatar in terms of being the main depots of terms of support for Hamas in Israel. Talk about those two countries and the amount of money, the amount of armament that is going through those countries into Hamas.
Well, Qatar needs a surrogate terrorist organization around the Jewish state of Israel because a part of their plan is to join with this coalition to wipe out the Jewish state of Israel. Turkey needs the exact same thing. They need to have a surrogate operation there, and in the Gaza Strip, they have chosen Hamas to be that surrogate terrorist group that's going to do their bidding for them as they try to get rid of the Jewish state of Israel. In fact, I think I mentioned earlier in the program, the leadership of Israel says that the foreign headquarters for Hamas is located in Turkey, so that gives them a great entree into the battles going on, an influence upon these leaders of Hamas, and ultimately what they are going to be doing. You know, you have to realize that Turkey was, for about a 400-year period of time, from around 1500 to 1900, the leader of the entire Middle East. It was the Ottoman Empire. It was the Islamic base for the entire world. In fact, they were known at that time as the Turkish Caliphate, which is what we're seeing over there in Syria and Iraq with ICE, the Islamic State, and with al-Baghdadi, who has set up this caliphate. So caliphate is not new. The precedent would go back in history to that 400-year period of time. In fact, the Ottoman Empire was brought down by the Brits. That was the change of the Middle East. Now, Turkey wants that back. Tayyip Erdogan once again wants to have that power that they had in the Ottoman Empire. The church was in there. That was Asia Minor in biblical times. That's where Paul preached, and many churches were established. Jesus in Revelation 2 and 3 said, if you don't do what I tell you to do, I know your works, they're pretty good, but I've got somewhat against you. I'm going to remove you. That's what happened. The church was removed because they didn't stand up to the standard that the Lord had set. When you have that vacuum, then you have rushing into it the Islamic world. Leader was Muhammad, and he went that way, and it started moving westward. They were going into Europe. That's what's being repeated today, John. That's why Turkey is a major player in this end time scenario that's found in Ezekiel 38. But in that alignment of nations, they will be key as well as they assist the other nations to come together. And many of them are falling right in line with what Tayyip Erdogan wants to do, have an Islamic control over the entire Middle East.
How can you tell, and how can you describe to our people how close we are to the Ezekiel 38 war? One of the ways I would think you can do it is by showing the relationships that are already existing politically right now at this moment between the players of Ezekiel 38 in Turkey, okay? Go through the list and give us some illustrations of how partnerships are formed already between those nations.
Partnerships are formed now between Turkey and these other nations because they need water. Turkey is a major supplier of water in the entire Middle East. That's one alliance that's been put together. In fact, ironically, a couple of years ago, Turkey made a decision and an agreement with Israel to supply them water. Because of what's been going on, because of Hamas, Turkey has backed away from that agreement. So you can see that does form very interesting coalitions. But when you start looking at the other nations, you have to remember that Ahmadinejad, when he was president of Iran, he came in and visited Tayyip Erdogan. They set up trade agreements, military agreements, etc. Iran is one of those other players. That's the Persia of Ezekiel chapter 38 and verse 5. So there was a relationship there. Russia has a relationship with Turkey. Russia is the Magog, the leader of this coalition of nations that will come against the Jewish state of Israel. When you start looking at what's happening in Lebanon with Hezbollah basically taking control of the Lebanese government. The Lebanese government it's just the shadow of any type of government that there should be there. So there's a relationship developing there. They're not going to take on Turkey and mess with them. They're joining forces together. When you look at some of the other nations, you have Libya. What's happening in Libya, that's off the wall. I mean, they have stolen 12 airplanes from Tripoli, where the airport was, and take them into hiding. And what is that going to be used for? Some type of terroristic attack?
They did that in 1 month. They stole those 12 airplanes.
Exactly. So when you're watching these things unfolding, Egypt right now seems to look like it's some type of a friend to Israel because they brokered the Israeli-Hamas deal, but they're not. They are joining relationships with Russia. Russia's now supplying their military armament. The Muslim Brotherhood is not going away. They're still around. A part of what's happening in Libya is attributed to the Muslim Brotherhood. Some of the major players in Syria who are fighting Bashar Assad, a part of the Muslim Brotherhood. I mean, I could just go on and on. What's happening in Ethiopia, Somalia, Sudan, they are saying they're a part of the Islamic State led by al-Baghdadi there in Syria and Iraq. So all of these coalitions are quickly coming together to do one thing. They may be enemies with each other right now, but if your enemy is my enemy, we become partners, and that is forming. The lowest common denominator in all of the nations that we read in Ezekiel 38, Psalm 83, and over there in the book of Daniel chapter 11, they're Islamic in faith. And they hate the Jewish people. They realize what God's promised to give the Jewish people. It's most of their land. They don't want that to happen. They're going to come. And it's going to be very soon after the rapture of the church. So that should make the world wake up. In fact, it's going to happen in that first 6-month period after the rapture of the church. And the reason for that is because over in Rome at that point in time, the Antichrist, which will come out of the revived Roman Empire, i.e. the structure being the European Union, he will go to Rome. He will set up a false religion. He will also set up the revived Roman Empire. And with that going on, he has to deal with the religions of the world. Islam is an exclusive religiosity. They're not going to join with that false religion over there in Rome, Revelation chapter 17. That's evident right there in the Islamic State, what's happening with the Christians in the Middle East.
Yeah, and the Bible predicts that when this Ezekiel 38 coalition of nations comes against Israel, that's going to take place inside of the tribulation period, and before the tribulation you have the rapture. So it would tell me that we're really close to when the rapture is going to happen. It could happen at any time because these nations are all making noises against Israel right now. The world is turning against them because of the Hamas-Israeli war. The Bible talks about nation coming against nation and kingdom against kingdom, and this must take place, and yet the end is to come. Okay? Now, next week, we're going to summarize these world events that we've been talking about, and then I'm going to ask Dr. DeYoung to lay out the prophetic scenario and include the European Union, Russia, what's going to happen in Israel, the Ezekiel 38 coalition of nations, and answer the question also, is America mentioned in end-time events? So all of these important questions we'll talk about next week. I hope that you'll join us.
Stay tuned for scenes from next week's program.